G'day everyone, an absolute smorgasbord of rugby over the weekend. It was pretty exciting. So what I've decided to do now is every Monday during this international test season, I'll do a recap of the weekend's games and just give you my brief views and opinions after the weekend, because there's so much rugby going on, it's difficult to make hundreds of videos about all these games. But I will be continuing my preview and review videos of the major games. And every Monday I will now do this show, which will be a recap of all of the games that I watched in the weekend. G'day, if you haven't been here before, my name is Mark. I'm a retired Kiwi bloke. I live in beautiful Cancun in Mexico, and I'm a huge rugby fan. Not just of the New Zealand All Blacks, but a lot of teams across the world, and I just love watching international rugby. And this past weekend, boy, did we have a smorgasbord of test matches. They were absolutely brilliant. Okay, so the format of this show is quite simple. I'm going to go through the games that I watched in the weekend, give you my quick, brief overview on how I feel about those games now on Monday morning after the weekend, and all the adrenaline's calmed down a little bit. I'll give you the scores. So if you haven't watched these games and you're going to watch them, spoiler alert, I am going to share the scores of these games right here in this particular episode. So let's get on with it. And the first game I watched in the weekend was the Maori All Blacks playing against Scotland in Whangarei in New Zealand. It was the first time the Scottish team actually beat the Maori All Blacks, and it was a great game of rugby. Unfortunately for the Maori All Blacks, they got well behind in this game and they had 2 players sent off to yellow cards. But the Maori All Blacks had to do a bit of chasing in this game, and they didn't quite get there in the end. They were really attacking towards the end of the game, but the Scottish team came out on top, scoring 4 tries. The Maori All Blacks also scored 4 tries, but the difference was in the kicking. Good games from Horn at halfback for Scotland. Thought he played really well. Reid on the wing was also very good. And I thought Hastings did a good job as well. I think he's going to grow into that 10 jersey very well. The Maori All Blacks let themselves down on occasions, discipline a little bit, got the better of them on this occasion, and also their set piece wasn't as good as it should have been. But it was a great game, and it was a very good finish to the game, very exciting finish. Everybody was thinking whether or not the Maori All Blacks could get there in the end. They didn't. Scotland, well-deserved win. It was great seeing their newish team of players out there as well, giving it a go. And now they'll travel off to Fiji to take on Fiji and Suva, which is going to be part of their Pacific Nations tour this year, Scotland. So a fantastic thing to see Scotland win that game in New Zealand, but also to be touring the Pacific Nations. And this is a fantastic thing for world rugby. I'm really into this stuff. I want to see the game growing across the world, and by having teams like Scotland travel to these places, thumbs up from me. It's a very good one indeed. So there we go. That was the first game I watched in the weekend. Okay, the next game in the weekend was Japan versus Wales. Now, I haven't watched this one yet, so I'm going to go and watch this one this afternoon. But Japan got over top of Wales. If you go back to my poll on my YouTube channel, you'll see that there was a very close result between everybody voting on that one. We weren't too sure whether Japan or Wales were going to go over the finish line. Well, it was Japan in the end, 24 points to 19. It looks like Japan came back in that game and stole it off the Welsh in the end, as I say. So what a fantastic win to Japan. Congratulations to all the Japanese rugby fans across the world. Eddie Jones does it again. And Wales, well, what do we say? Their losing streak continues, and when is it going to turn around? I'm sure they're motivated for these games, but they're just not getting across the finish line. Well played, Japan, and let's see what you can do next up in your next test match. Okay, the next game is a game I watched again, New Zealand versus France, and here we are on Monday morning in Cancun, and I've had a chance to look at the game again. It's always pretty interesting when you go back and watch these games for the second time to see all the things that you didn't see. So my take on this game has changed a little bit since the end of the game and the video I put out. I think the All Blacks did pretty well. They had a lot of opportunities that they just didn't convert. So that made them look a bit rusty and a bit sluggish at times in terms of being able to execute these things. I'll tell you what, if they got some of those executions right, they could have run over the top of this French team. But in saying that, I thought this French team, this inexperienced French team, played extremely well. Their defense was really good. It was an exciting game of rugby, wasn't it? It was down to the last few minutes, deciding on who was going to win that game. The All Blacks scored some good tries. Will Jordan was on point again. Thought Beauden Barrett had an exceptional game for the All Blacks. Not only was he good in terms of distribution, Yes, he tried a few kicks that didn't come off, but you've got to give these things a go. And on a good day, those things would have come off and he would have looked like a superhero. But he did set up a couple of tries. He did kick very well, 4 conversions out of 4. What more can you ask from the guy? I think he did pretty well and was one of the best All Blacks on the field. But Fabian Holland stood out for me. I thought he had a brilliant game at lock. I would say he's New Zealand's best lock at the moment, even though it was his debut for the All Blacks. I thought he did exceptionally well. And Cam Roigard had a good game as well. A little bit muffed about him coming off. Cortez Ratama came on, and I thought the All Blacks lost a little bit of emphasis at that stage because Cam Roigard was having a very, very good game in my opinion. Still a question mark over Rieko Ioane, as I've said in previous videos. I think his time is up for the All Blacks, to be honest. And the reason I say that is because I just don't think he's got the self-belief that he had, and I don't think he's got the pace anymore that he had. And we're 2 years out from the Rugby World Cup. I don't see Rieko Ioane making it to the Rugby World Cup with his All Black team and being able to deliver the level of rugby that we're seeing from the likes of Cheslin Colby, Kurt Lee Ardenser, and a lot of other wingers across the world at the moment. So if he's not going to be a centre and a midfield player for the All Blacks, then I think it's time that we started looking at other options as far as the All Blacks go. And that's one of the big things that came out of that game in the weekend for me. Unfortunate for Sevu Reece, but question mark on him as well. And as I said in my preview video, I've got some issues around Sevu Reece being in this All Black team. Very good Super Rugby player, but when it goes up to that next level, I think the All Blacks need to find better world-class wingers and finishers, and we can see what Will Jordan does. So on the scoreboard and on the pitch, it was a close game, 31 points to 27 in the end to the All Blacks. I think they'll go to Wellington knowing that they can do better. Wellington's a bit of a voodoo ground, we keep saying it, but the fact is the All Blacks have only won between 60 and 70% of their games in Wellington, but I'm sure Scott Robertson will be acknowledging that, but also wanting to get out and give a much better performance to all those people that are going to turn up in the weekend to watch the All Blacks in the second test against France. It should be another cracker of a game. Okay, next up was the British and Irish Lions against the Waratahs in Sydney. It was a record crowd that turned up at the Sydney Football Stadium on the weekend for this one, and it was the most disappointing game of the British and Irish Lions to us so far. Unfortunately, the team that Andy Farrell picked didn't live up to the expectation, but also it didn't live up to the class that we saw in the first 2 games against the Western Force and the Queensland Red. So this would have been disappointing for Andy Farrell, but on the other hand, it would have also given him some indication of where he's going with his selections, because the 2 teams we'd seen so far have really been able to put it out there on the pitch. The one big difference in this game is I thought the New South Waratahs stayed longer in the game than the other 2 opponents have. Therefore, they forced the British and Irish Lions into some mistakes, and we saw that translating into the way that the British and Irish Lions were playing. But I've seen some really good things from the Lions so far on this tour. I think they're going to keep improving. The games keep on coming. They've got a game against against the Brumbies in Canberra on Wednesday night. That's going to be a really interesting one as well. But all these games are helping the Lions get into some rhythm and building their motivation towards that first test match on July the 19th against the Wallabies. I'm going to talk about how I see that from the Wallaby side after I talk about their game from this weekend. But a disappointing game from the Lions. They'll bounce back, I'm sure. We'll see a different team again on Wednesday night against the Brumbies. Let's see how they go on that one. The final score in this game from the Sydney Football Stadium, 21 points to 10 in favour of the British and Irish Lions. Now the next game I watched was from South Africa in Pretoria at Loftus Versfeld between the Springboks and the Italians. And of course, as we know, the Italians send an inexperienced team to South Africa for this tour to give those players an opportunity. Now I have made a very in-depth analysis video of this particular game, so if you want to check that out, go up there and do that now. But in the end, the Springboks were too good for Italy, running out 42 points to 24 winners. Some really good tries. 6 of them came from the South Africans, and there were some standout players for me. I thought Kurt Lee Ardenser had a fantastic game. We didn't see quite as much of Colby in this game as we usually do. Damian Willemse was back in the South African team, and he had a fantastic game. There was one particular play early in the second half when Willemse took off through and passed about 8 Italian players without getting caught and setting up a very good play for the next. Vincent Chatuka was fantastic again for the Springboks in this game, and so was Lud de Jager. Had a fantastic game as well, getting a lot of good quality possession from the lineouts, and he's very good in set piece play, as was Eben Etzebeth this weekend. Marco van Staden scored a try. We saw some good work from Malcolm Marks and Oxenchair Bonami. I thought was a little bit off when he came on with his line out throwing. And we saw some good stuff from Morne Vandenberg, the number 9 who started this game, scored 2 tries for the Springboks. And we saw the return of Faf de Klerk back into the 9 jersey as well in the second half, which was great to see. Willie LaRue came on for his 99th cap for the Springboks. Hopefully he'll get his 100th next weekend against Italy. And we saw some really good performances from Diolandi again with his kicking through. And Jesse Creel was the captain of the Springboks team for the first time in this particular match. It was a bit of a rusty, scrappy game from the Springboks, but I think they'll be much better for it. I think we'll see a different team against the Italians next weekend, and I think Rassi will up the ante at training this week to make sure the Springboks are on point and able to execute with a lot more structure. That's what they were really missing. I think they were a little bit fragmented throughout this particular game. But a win's a win in international rugby, a good win from the Springboks, and I'm sure they'll go on to improve next weekend. And what about the Italians? Well, they went very well in this game. I thought their defensive line was fantastic. They put in some overtime when it came to tackles, and they really showed that they were up for this competition against the Springboks. So I think this is exactly what we want to see between World Cups, with coaches and selectors bringing inexperienced players to play the best teams in the world, and they can only benefit from that. So I think the Italians would have taken a lot out of this game, and I think backing up again next weekend, they're going to be really on point to give the Springboks another hard workout, which is exactly what the Springboks will be looking for. So great performance from the Italians. I thought the Canoni brothers played very well again. We also saw a good performance from Dari in the number 10 jersey, I thought. And there was some good play out wide at times from the Italians when they did get a little bit of scrappy ball. Menoncello was one of the standouts in the back line for them. So a great performance by Italy, considering the score and the class they were up against. I think they put in a great effort this weekend. The next game that was up was the game between Georgia and Ireland that was played in Georgia over the weekend. Now, I haven't watched this game either. I'm going to watch this later today. And Ireland were the winners by 34 points to 5. So it looks like they did it fairly comfortably with an inexperienced team that Ireland's taken over to Georgia. Fantastic again to see the Irish playing in a country like Georgia, one of the smaller rugby nations, but doing very well in terms of its growth and development and support in the country. And of course, a lot of people are trying to get them to join the Six Nations competition as well, which would be fantastic for rugby. So as you know, I'm a huge supporter of seeing the game grow and develop in different countries. Georgia is one of those countries that I think are going to have a really good future in the game of rugby. So it was good to see the Irish out there, and obviously they had a very comfortable win. I'll come back. Then next up for me was watching the Argentina against England game that was played in La Plata in Argentina in the weekend. Now, what a game this was. This was a really fascinating game. The Argentinians came out with some really, really good players in their team. They were missing some key players, but England had a really good team in there as well. And right from the get-go, this game was fully on, and it was really interesting to watch. We got to half-time. It was only 3-0 to England at half-time, but it seemed like the game had exploded in the first half. There was a lot of defensive work going in. There was a lot of attacking play going on. The kicking game was pretty good. George Ford was having a good game from the England side. Spencer at halfback was playing well. Stewart at fullback for the English was going really well. But on the Argentinian side, the same old contenders were stepping up. We were seeing Montoya, the captain, have a good game. We're of Gonzalez, Martin Gonzalez, having a really good game. In fact, this was one of the better games that I've seen him play in a Los Pumas jersey. He was playing very, very well. And Pablo Matera, another, of course, that we're very familiar with within the Argentinian team. But I tell you what, in my opinion, where it was breaking down in this game for Argentina, it became more evident in the second half, was at number 10 with Santiago Carreras. Santiago Carreras has played some really good rugby over the years for Argentina, but I think now that we've seen Albanos at number 10, there's just a difference in class with these two guys. Albanos can really control the game. He makes the right decisions, and Carreras just wasn't doing this. He was kicking the ball at the wrong time, getting Argentina on the back foot instead of getting their forwards moving forward, and that was something that I really saw in the first half of this game that I felt was holding Argentina back. In the second half, well, it was a completely different game. This game broke right open, and the English started piling on the pressures, and they scored some fantastic tries. Roebuck got a couple, and he played really, really well on the wing. But it was a different England team that really came out in the second half. They seemed to understand what they needed to do to get through this Argentinian defence. And Argentina had all the play in the first half. They had a lot of possession, they had a lot of territory, but they were behind on the scoreboard by 3-0, and it was quite confusing to see how that actually came to fruition. But in the second half, England were able to apply pressure. They were able to get that territory going. George Ford was much better with his kicks in the second half in terms of territory, and they used Stewart under the high ball a lot, which really paid off in the end. So England ended up running away with the game by 35 points to 12 in the end. It was a really good performance, I thought, from England. When Argentina were attacking a lot in the first half, the defensive line from England was really outstanding. And Jamie George was doing really well. When Cunningham South came on in the second half, we saw him take it up another level as well, and it was a really, really good performance from England. So they got over the top in the end. As I said, 35 points to 12. They were good for it. Argentina would be a little bit disappointed in this game, but it comes back to me from that direction. Santiago Carreras was not giving from the number 10 jersey. So Contaponi, what's he going to do? We'll have to wait and see for the next game whether he makes any changes at number 10 in particular for the Argentinians, and whether or not they'll get some of their other better players back. Esgro, I thought, had a fantastic game on the wing. He's a really good winger, this guy, when he gets involved in the game. But again, Argentina were just missing a few things in the back line that could have helped them in this game. Now, the last game I watched in the weekend was the Australia versus Fiji game. It was played at the McDonald Stadium in Newcastle, just north of Sydney on the New South Wales coast. And what a game it was. Absolutely fantastic. Joe Schmidt was using this game as a warm-up before their test matches against the British and Irish Lions. And boy, did Australia need this warm-up game. And what a game. I was just thinking during the game, what a game it is to have as a warm-up game before the British and Irish Lions. It's not the best game, I don't think. And here's the reasons why I think that. First of all, Fiji are going to come at you, and they're going to do a lot of physicality. So there's a high chance of injury. And we saw that throughout this game. We saw Skipper go down, get injured, go off for an HIA. We saw Lolosio go off on a stretcher. And this was a dangerous game for Australia to have, I thought, in terms of scheduling before a very important British and Irish Lions series. And there's a bit of a question mark over that for me. The other thing the Fijians bring is this chaotic style of play. And the Australians want to play a team that gives them structure and purpose, just like the Lions will. And I think this was a different matchup than what the Australians are going to see against the British and Irish Lions. Another mistake I think that Australian rugby has made in the lead up to this particular series against the British and Irish Lions is this is the only one warm-up game. And from this game I saw yesterday, Australia need at least 2 or 3 games. On the other side, the British and Irish Lions playing all these games before the first test. They've got a huge advantage. Andy Farrell's having a look at all these different players and combinations that he's got. He's giving them game time under good competition, and then he's going to go into that first test match absolutely firing. On the other hand, Joe Schmidt had one game against Fiji. A really tough affair, a very big physical game against a very, very good rugby team. But it wasn't the kind of matchup that the Wallabies needed before this first test match. So as a result of that, I'm starting to see now the Australians really slipping down as far as their potential against the Lions. I think the Lions have a huge advantage going into the first test match for that reason. And we saw what happened in this game against Fiji. Fiji got really into this game and they played an absolutely fantastic game. There was a huge crowd supporting the Fijians at the McDonald Stadium in Newcastle yesterday, and they were getting behind this team, and it was really having a big impact. We saw great games from Kuravoli at halfback for the Fijians, and Tuasova, the big number 12 in the midfield, was doing some bursting runs, but it was the spontaneity and that brilliant offload play that we see from Fiji that scored 2 brilliant tries in this game, and they were very, very unfortunate not to win this game, which would have been a historical win against the Australian Wallabies. And it came down to the last minute of the game. The captain for the Wallabies went over Harry Wilson, and according to the referee, Harry Wilson turned over on his back and actually forced the ball down over the try line. I have a lot of skepticism around this. There wasn't a clear view of it. There were 3 Fijian players trying to hold Harry Wilson up. I'll leave it up to you to decide if you watched the game and saw the replays. I think the Fijians were very hard done by in this game. They deserved to win. My heart sunk. They were up 18 points to 14 with 5 minutes to go. They played their hearts out. They had the crowd on their side. They played entertaining rugby, just like we know the Fijians can. And they unfortunately ended up losing the game in the last seconds of the game. That's the way it goes, of course, in the game of rugby. You've got to play those 80 plus whatever extra minutes are added on. And unfortunately, on this occasion, the Fijians weren't able to get across the line. But it was a fantastic game of rugby from the Fijians. The Australians, well, they have a lot of work to do. It was very much a first game of the season. They were very rusty in some areas. As I said, Noah Lolesio got carried off on a stretcher. His head hit the ground in a very bad tackle. It was a good tackle, but it was a bad execution of how his head hit the ground. And as a result of that, we might see him out with concussion for a while. And that's something that Lolesio has on his resume, unfortunately. Some of the other players for the Australians that did well, I thought Nick Frost had a good game at lock. I thought Skipper had a good game when he came back on after his HIA experiment. And also I thought we saw a great game from Langy Gleeson, who started on as a loose forward in this game. Harry Wilson had a great game at number 8. Tate McDermott did well at halfback. But again, there were some things from the Australian backline. Len Ikitau wasn't able to break through the Fijians as much as we thought. Sua Ali was there, but not having that huge impact on the game, as with Tom Wright at number 15. Matt Jorgensen was back in the team for the Aussies, which was a good thing to see. Harry Potter played on the other wing. He did very well. But I tell you what, these Australian backs, they need to see some ball, and they need to see some innovation and creativity if they're going to have any chance against the British and Irish Lions. Otherwise, the Lions are going to tear them to shreds. That's my early prediction as we start heading towards that test series. But hey, for everybody that got along to the McDonald's Stadium in Newcastle yesterday to watch that game, you got value for money for your tickets, that's for sure. Fijians were absolutely outstanding. If you haven't watched the game, go and watch it because it's worth looking at. It was one of those ones where you're on the edge of your seat to the last minute. Absolutely brilliant game, and a great game to end this round of international games across the world this particular weekend. So a huge amount of rugby. As I said, there's a couple of games there I haven't watched. I'll go and watch those today. But for the rest of it, all exciting stuff. And I've decided to choose a player of the week out of all those games this weekend that I've watched so far. And normally you'd say, well, you know, the tries that are scored by some of the backs are spectacular. We saw Kurtley Ardenser for South Africa score a brilliant try. We saw Will Jordan get a couple of tries for the All Blacks. But I think the backs get far too much kudos in this game of ours these days. So I've decided to give my player of the week to a forward this week. And that forward is Pierre Schumann, who played for the British and Irish Lions, of course, the Scottish player, who was a prop against the New South Wales Waratahs. And the reason I'm giving him player of the week this week is because he did an absolutely awesome job against the Australian prop Taniela Tupou. And I tell you what, in the first 20 minutes of that game, Schumann showed his class, and he got 4 penalties in a row, 4 scrum penalties in a row for the British and Irish Lions. And when you've got a prop that's doing that in the scrum and supporting your team in that way, giving you penalties and an opportunity for possession and territory, that's a fantastic thing for any team. He continued on doing that throughout the game, Schumann, and I thought he had an outstanding game in his set piece play. He really showed the difference in class between those two players. And I tell you what, Taniela Tupou is no mug at rugby union, but he got absolutely outplayed and slaughtered by Schumann in the weekend. So there you go, my player of the week this week, Pierre Schumann for the British and Irish Lions. So there we go. If you've been following along my journey on this channel, Inside Rugby with Mark, and you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, please do so. It doesn't cost you anything, it helps me out a lot. If you enjoyed my content again today, give the video a thumbs up, a like, and don't forget to drop me your comments. I want to hear what games you watched over the weekend, which ones you enjoyed, and have you got a player of the week that stood out for you? I'd love to read about it in the comments, so don't be shy in letting me know the outcome of your watching the beautiful games of rugby across the world. Now we start off, we're on a fresh week, and already it's Tuesday coming up down under, so I've got to get myself working and start leading into the next round of fantastic games. We're going to see the last game between South Africa and Italy that's going to be played in South Africa this weekend. We're going to see the second of 3 games between the All Blacks and France that'll be played in Wellington this weekend, and there's a host of other games that I'll talk about during the week, so make sure you stick around here on Inside Rugby with Mark. That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed this new show. Every Monday now, a recap of the international games across the weekend, and I'll see you again very soon in the next video. Until then, Stay safe, stay well, keep enjoying your rugby across the world, and it's time to say adios from beautiful Cancun in Mexico. Bye for now.